All right, here is your mini lecture for week one. So, an introduction to international business. International business transcends national borders, encompassing all commercial transactions between two or more countries. These transactions involve both private companies seeking profit and governments whose motivations may vary. The field's growing significance stems from the increasing integration of global markets, making it crucial for businesses and individuals to grasp its intricacies. International business isn't solely about large multinational corporations. It also includes small firms engaging in import and export activities, and it highlights the broad reach of global commerce. Understanding international business is vital even for those without direct international responsibilities, as global events and regulations impact um, numerous aspects of the economy, including company profits, employment, consumer prices, national security, and other factors. So, why do companies engage in international business? Well, companies pursue international expansion for a variety of strategic reasons or objectives. These objectives are frequently intertwined and they're mutually reinforcing. Some of them include expanding sales. So, international markets offer a significantly larger customer base than domestic markets alone offer. This potential, um, this offers potential for increased sales volume, and it directly translates into higher profits, especially when considering the economies of scale achievable through expanded um, production. Some examples are BASF in Germany, Electrolux in Sweden, Sony in Japan. These are just some of the companies, some of the numerous companies that illustrate success um, of entities that are heavily relying on international sales. And smaller companies benefit as well, particularly by supplying components to larger international firms. Another benefit of international business is acquiring resources. So, access to resources beyond a company's domestic borders is a powerful driver of internationalization. This includes sourcing raw materials, capital, technology, specialized knowledge, particularly at competitive prices, um, and even acquiring unique resources that may not be available domestically. This strategy can lead to enhanced product quality, differentiation from competitors, and usually improved profit margins. Diversifying your sources of sales and supplies is another benefit of international business. It reduces the reliance on a single market, which helps mitigate some risk. So, internationalization helps buffer against economic downturns, which we call recessions, in a single country, and ensures a consistent supply of necessary inputs, even if prices fluctuate in one region. This diversification reduces vulnerability to market shocks and enhances long-term stability. Minimizing competitive risk is another factor for doing international business. Companies often expand internationally as a defensive measure to counter the actions of competitors. By establishing a global presence, firms can reduce their vulnerability to aggressive competitors operating in domestic or other specific markets, preventing the erosion of market share. There's a profit advantage since international operations can often lead to higher profit margins. This can be achieved through economies of scale, access to cheaper inputs, or the exploitation of market inefficiencies. Growth opportunities. International markets, or many of them, present vast growth potential, particularly in countries experiencing rapid population and income growth. For example, India. And this can lead to significant expansion opportunities for businesses willing to take on the challenges of operating in new and diverse markets. And lastly, government policies and regulations is another factor for doing international business. So, favorable government policies and regulations, such as tax incentives or streamlined bureaucratic processes, can act as significant catalysts for international business expansion. And I'll tell you that for a while, uh, Bermuda and some other places in the Caribbean were known as tax havens. And so those would create fertile grounds for international business expansion. Some ways of international business expansion. Um, so companies often enter the international arena through several distinct operational modes, each carrying its own level of risk and own level of commitment. Some of these include merchandise exports and imports. This is usually the most straightforward method. It involves the exchange of physical goods across national borders. It's prevalent for businesses of all sizes, from small exporters to large multinationals. And if you're following the news at all, you will hear about the trade wars that are occurring with imports and exports into and out of Mexico, Canada, China, and also the EU. Um, and we'll talk shortly about some barriers to international trade, with one of them being tariffs. And that is what's happening in the international trade war that's happening now with our government and several international governments. Another mode of international business expansion is service exports and imports. And this is services constitute a significant portion of international transactions, encompassing activities such as tourism, transportation, consulting, engineering, which we would call specialized services, and also licensing or franchising intellectual property. And then lastly, foreign direct investment. So FDI represents a higher level of commitment, um, since it usually confers significant ownership or control in foreign companies. This can include joint ventures, wholly owned subsidiaries, um, and these offer enhanced control over operations and resource access. But it does have increased risk, right? So companies generally follow predictable expansion patterns, starting with less risky strategies such as exporting, and gradually escalating their involvement to that FDI strategy. Companies often will begin in geographically proximate or culturally similar markets before venturing into more diverse territories. And this evolution reflects a strategy of risk minimization, with companies gradually expanding their international operations as their experience, uh, their confidence, and their capacity. As they all grow, you'll find that companies expand further and further, um, and increase their level of risk tolerance. Governments often intervene to influence the volume and value of international trade, which I just talked about. Um, and the way how they can do this is one with what we call tariffs. Tariffs or duties, they're taxes, and they're taxes that are levied on goods crossing international borders. They directly impact prices. And there are different types of tariffs that exist, including export tariffs, import tariffs, transit tariffs, ad valorem tariffs, and compound tariffs. Um, and yes, again, tariffs do impact prices. They cause prices to go up. And that usually is pushed through to the end consumer or the end user. And as I mentioned earlier, um, the US is currently having a trade war because of tariffs being levied on goods that are being imported into the US. And so goods that are coming into the US are being assessed taxes, which means they're costing more for the people importing them, the businesses that are importing them. And so then when they go back to resell them to the local consumer, you and me, they'll cost more for us as well, unless the business decides to absorb that cost, which a lot of them probably won't do. Um, on the flip side, countries are lashing back and implementing their own tariffs. So as we send goods abroad, um, it's causing prices abroad to be more expensive as well. And why that's important is because if prices become more expensive abroad, then those countries may not buy goods that are produced in the US. So that directly impacts our economy. And the fact that our prices are increasing too obviously causes inflation. All right. Couple other things I want you to be aware of are some major differences between international and domestic business. So international businesses, or international business, I should say, is significantly more complex than domestic business due to differences in the nationalities of the parties. So dealing with diverse legal and cultural frameworks, that adds some complexity to international business. Mobility of factors of production, so relatively lower mobility of labor and capital compared to domestic operations will introduce some unique challenges. Variations in business practices and political systems. So significant differences exist in business ethics, legal systems, and government regulations, and that can introduce some complexities in the international business arena. And the use of different currencies is very important. So managing exchange rate risk and financial transactions in multiple currencies can be a pretty big challenge for international business. Last two things I want to talk about for this lecture are cultural um, understanding and counter trade. So it's very important to note that successful international business requires a thorough understanding of local cultures. Businesses must adapt to local customs and preferences to enhance their market appeal and avoid missteps. Counter trade, an alternative system of exchange involving the bartering of goods or services, can be a particularly useful method in circumstances where conventional currency-based transactions are impractical. And then some ethical issues that I want to just discuss really quickly. Ethical considerations are important in international business. Companies must they must navigate diverse ethical traditions and legal systems while maintaining high standards of conduct. So the textbook highlights ethical issues arising from cultural differences, varying legal systems, different economic development levels, inadequate regulation, multinational corporate power, and corruption. All right. So developing a robust ethical framework, including clear codes of conduct and training programs, is very vital to doing business internationally. And your textbook stresses the importance of considering the impact of decisions on all stakeholders and engaging in objective, fair, and transparent decision-making processes, emphasizing the crucial difference between perceived and objectively defined ethical behavior. And one ethical consideration that I want to mention really quickly is we have a law in the US called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which basically prohibits giving anything of value to a government official to secure or maintain business. And this is important because even though that's illegal in the US, in countries such as China, for example, um, it's customary to give government officials gifts to get business done. But that's against the law in the US. So that's an ethical and a legal consideration that if a company in the US wanted to do business in China, they need to be very much aware of that because if they violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, um, even though they're based in the U.S. Um, and violating the law in China, they will still be liable. All right. So that's the lecture for this week. Thank you all.